Atlantis Adventure is the Intamin Aqua Trax coaster at Lotte World Adventure in Seoul, South Korea. More than 20 years later, it remains the only installation of the model ever built. This is probably one of the oddest Intamin launched coasters in the entire world, and I will explain why in this review. Lotte World Adventure opened in 1989 with two roller coasters, but what is arguably their signature roller coaster today did not open until 2003 with Atlantis Adventure. This would be the prototype of a brand new model from Intamin known as an Aqua Trax, which was named that due to all the water effects the ride used. This made it a water ride without needing a splashdown. At least, that was the intention. Later on, all of the water effects were disabled. Although I am not sure why that is the case, I suspect it might be because of maintenance or rider comfort reasons. That is somewhat unfortunate, but for me personally, it is not a deal breaker. The bigger issue is that Atlantis Adventure does not operate in the rain, which is quite ironic for a model called the Aqua Trax. On the day I was there was a slight drizzle in the early morning, but by the time I got to the park, it had long since stopped. However, I went over to Atlantis Adventure only to find it closed, and it only opened later in the afternoon. Yes, they were even stricter than Gyeongju World when it came to their rain policy, as the rides there did keep on operating for a little while after it started raining in order to clear the queue line. When I went, there were a lot of people at the park, pun intended, which I have heard is a very common occurrence. After Atlantis Adventure opened, the wait quickly ballooned to nearly 2 hours. The queue line spilled out of the entrance and snaked around an entire lagoon. As such, I only managed to get one ride on this coaster. I had heard there was a single rider line that could save a lot of time, but after asking around and searching, I could not find it. It certainly does not help that the ride has a relatively poor capacity. The station can accommodate 2 trains. Each train has one car that holds 8 people in 4 rows of 2, so there will only be 16 people loading at any given time. They were using 2 pairs of 2 cars for a total of 4, but the dispatches weren't great, and the next pair often stacked on the turn into the station for a couple of minutes. It wasn't as bad as what I'm used to seeing in China, but for how crowded the park was, there was certainly a lot of room for improvement. Atlantis Adventure is quite well themed. The entrance is a giant arch with 2 soldiers standing on either side, and the station also gives a really grand and mysterious atmosphere with all the decor. There is also a really cool pattern on the cars, causing them to resemble boats traveling through this lost flooded civilization. Finally, the ride has a huge fake mountain which it travels in and out of multiple times throughout the course. It is worth noting that Atlantis Adventure has a very different seating arrangement to a more traditional coaster. Basically, you straddle a bench and there is space to place your feet on either side. You are restrained by a fairly normal lap bar, which is very similar to the standard Intamin T-bar which can be found on so many of their other rides across the world. Overall, I find these seats and restraints comfortable enough as they give your upper body a lot of freedom to feel the laterals and airtime that this ride gives. Upon dispatching, you leave the station and go into a slight ascent. That is followed by a launch. Because the cars dispatch one after another, the second one will have to wait behind the launch track for a little bit for the first one to clear the block section. The launch itself has a pretty good kick to it. That is followed by an airtime hill that has a good burst of ejector airtime. At this point you are inside that fake mountain. This leads into a forceful turn that briefly exits that mountain. After this, you go into another turn which goes in the opposite direction. This also has some nice positive Gs and exits the mountain for a little bit. That transitions into one final turn inside the mountain. This has milder positive Gs than the prior turns, but the banking does level off early, resulting in some good laterals. Then, you emerge out of the mountain and hit the mid-course brake run. Unfortunately, you will be slowed to a near stop on this brake run. As a result, the subsequent drop only gives a weak pop of floater airtime. That is followed by a trim brake that once again will decelerate you quite abruptly. After that, you go through a low turn that hugs the ground, or more accurately, a pool of water. You will get some pretty good positive Gs here. This exits into a slight left turn that gives another good burst of laterals. Then you hit a brake run, but the ride isn't over yet. That is followed by a brief dark ride scene inside the mountain. After that, you go up an LSM lift hill, which feels quite similar to a traditional lift hill, just a little bit faster. At the top, you go around a slow turn before plunging down another large drop. This gives some weak floater airtime. Then you go into an airtime hill, which gives a nice burst of ejector airtime combined with some laterals. This is also where you re-enter the mountain. That is followed by a decently forceful turn, which is inside one of the turns earlier in the ride. After that, there is one more drop exiting the mountain, which gives some good sustained floater airtime. Next, you go into a slight right turn, which gives another good lateral jolt. Then, you reach the final brake run and go around one last turn, where you will probably have to wait a couple of minutes for the next pair of boats to dispatch before you go back into the station and disembark, ending the 670 meter or 2,198 foot long coaster. As a whole, Atlantis Adventure is a good but somewhat flawed roller coaster. Firstly, even after more than 2 decades of operation, it is still glass smooth and doesn't have the slightest hint of a rattle anywhere on the track, which is very impressive. In terms of forces, it does have some enjoyable moments such as the first launch, airtime moments, and a few lateral jolts. However, I do wish some of the large drops had slightly better airtime and the mid-course brake run did not completely sap the train of all of its speed. Although, it is worth noting that my one and only ride on Atlantis Adventure was in the second out of 4 rows. While the singular cars should in theory make the forces quite uniform across the train, it is still possible that the airtime could be slightly better in the back. Lastly, the theming on this ride is really good, as there is literally an entire fake mountain erected on and around the coaster, and there are also a lot of other beautiful props and decorations scattered around as well. So what is my rating for Atlantis Adventure? I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. I would have gotten another ride on the thing, but again, I wasn't going to wait another 2 hours. That is quite unfortunate, as this is a solid ride with some nice positive G's, fun airtime moments, and even a few unexpected lateral jolts mixed in. Though it also suffers from poor pacing in some parts, which really does remind me of Light of Revenge at Happy Valley Nanjing in that regard. Still, the good forces combined with a top-notch theming and unique seating make this a must-ride if you ever find yourself in Seoul. With all that said, what are your thoughts on Atlantis Adventure? Have you been on it? Did you enjoy it? Was it also a 2-hour wait for you? I would love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this coaster review, and I would be very grateful if you gave this video a like and subscribe to my channel, since more videos will be coming soon. Thanks for watching.